is the best movie I've ever seen! Water. I have an idea that's gonna make millions.
I'm listening.
We make Final Fantasy Versus XIII a musical. Alright, hey, what's up gentlemen and ladies? Let's not waste any time. You read the title, you know what this video is going to be about, so let's just hop straight into it, shall we? Now, as I'm sure most of you are aware, Final Fantasy XV was originally part of this sub-series within Final Fantasy called the Fabula Nova Crystallis. I might have made a video or two about it in the past. They might be worth checking out, I don't know. Along with Final Fantasy XIII and Final Fantasy Agito 13, known now as Final Fantasy Type 0, Final Fantasy XV was part of this series in the form of Final Fantasy Versus XIII. So many Final Fantasies in that sentence. And that game was gonna have a much different story than what we got in the final product. There was themes having to do with sleep, dark, Shakespeare-inspired tragedy, and just a whole bunch of different plot points like Regis and Luna, or Stella as she was known back then, having different roles. But I'm not here to give you guys the rundown of what I think Versus XIII's story was gonna be, because at this point, we're never gonna get it, and crying over spilled milk isn't gonna change anything. That's not the problem I have. The problem I have is that so often I see people leaving comments, writing articles, or even making whole videos talking about why the story of Final Fantasy Versus XIII was supposedly so much better than what we got in the final product with 15. Because I guess somehow these people snuck into Square Enix headquarters and stole all of the old concept scripts and storyboards from like 2012, and they just know that it would have been better. Except no, obviously these people know no more of Versus XIII's story than anybody else, and no, I'm not gonna base an entire argument on some leaks from someone that supposedly knew the full story of Versus without providing any evidence or reasoning as to why they do, and that literally anybody could have claimed and written. That's actually a logical fallacy of comparing a product to what could have been, because you don't know. You simply don't know what the final result of a complete Versus XIII would have been. For all we know, it could have been terrible. The thing is, people like to pretend that issues regarding 15's development only began after Tabata hopped on board, but that's really not true. Nomura had been having issues with the game for years prior. In fact, the reason Tabata and his team were called to work on the project in 2012 was because there was very little progress being done for Versus XIII, and the team was initially very hesitant at first as Versus XIII had grown a bad reputation within the company. Nomura himself admitted that the gameplay that had been shown off for Versus XIII in 2009, 3 years after they announced the game, wasn't even from the final product, but rather a demo that they had created just for those trailers. So all of these people saying that Versus XIII's gameplay looked so much better, yeah, of course it did, because it was made to look cool on a trailer, not to function on a game. And the same can be said of the story. Everybody loves to complain that the old story trailers we got for Versus XIII seemed so much better than 15's, but that's all they were. Trailers, teasers, concepts. No finalized and comprehensive story existed for this game. It's possible, and indeed likely, that Nomura just came up with these cool looking story trailers, but then had no idea what any kind of coherent story would look like. And don't take this from me, take it from Nomura himself. He has explained in the past how with his other series, Kingdom Hearts, he often writes cool moments and concepts for awesome looking trailers and secret endings first, and then finds a way to tie them into the story later. And I think a lot of people can agree that Nomura's work suffers because of it. Often he has to go through very needlessly complicated story points to try and tie the entire game back together just so we can have the one cool moment at the end. Is it that hard to believe then that Nomura was doing something similar with Versus XIII, and when Tabata and the new set of writers came in, they weren't very pleased with it, so they just changed it? I genuinely don't understand this logic that fans have where they say that Versus XIII was this masterpiece of writing that would have been the be-all, end-all Final Fantasy game and that would have trumped any other game's plot, but then the evil Tabata came in and purposely changed everything. He read the plot and he deliberately ruined it because he's evil. Like, no, obviously if there was changes made to the story, it's because they felt it didn't work, or maybe it just wasn't good altogether. I mean, you've heard the developer horror stories. They were changing aspects of the plot of 15 mere months before the game released. They were still having a hard time trying to figure out how to make everything work. Do you you really think that they would be struggling this much if the foundation left by Nomura was so amazing and revolutionary? Tabata himself said that he came into the project when it was on the brink of cancellation. The only reason that Versus 13 was saved is because it got changed into a number title, and even then, 90% of the staff working on the game was against this idea because initially the project was so messy and they didn't know if they'd be able to salvage it. Doesn't sound like the makings of the be-all end-all Final Fantasy game to me. To quote Tabata himself, because the game itself was incomplete, there really wasn't a whole lot brought over, if I'm speaking honestly. It's pretty difficult to compare apples and oranges in this case. You have something that was incomplete and never really fully formed. Final Fantasy Versus XIII was more an idea than an actual game, whereas what we've created here is a complete finished product. And if I'm being 100% honest, I think Versus did nothing but hurt 15's story in the long run. Tabata expressed in that same interview how they tried to make all of these aspects from Versus 13 somehow fit into the story of 15. Mind you, these were just aspects and characters that were made public in trailers. It's possible, and indeed very likely in my opinion, that story points and characters that were meant to be in Versus 13 but were never officially shown off to the public were also cut behind the scenes. Characters like Core, Ravis, Gentiana, they were only really kept because fans had already seen them in old trailers, but if you actually look at their roles in the game, they're very small and were clearly written last minute. Core was originally supposed to be one of the main party members along with the other 4 guys, but in the final game, he shows up once for no joke 5 minutes and then you don't see him again. Ravis originally had a white hood and was this mysterious character who could use these magical glyphs. In the final game, he has none of that and instead he just gets pissed off at Noctis and then gets turned into a demon. In the case of Gentiana, for crying out loud, the developers themselves called her the black-haired woman internally for years because they didn't have any kind of clue what they were going to do with her in terms of a story. All they knew is that they had to keep her in the game somehow because she was in one of the old trailers and people would get mad if she wasn't. And as for Stella, her role was changed so drastically, and Tabata knew that fans would be so disappointed because the original Versus story was not working and had to be rewritten that they decided to change her name altogether into Luna. And personally, I kinda wish that they had changed her design as well because the comparisons between the two characters are still very common and very, very annoying. Kind of ironic, isn't it? Fans keep complaining that 15 ruined Versus 13, but the more you look into it, it seems that it was actually Versus 13 that ruined major aspects of 15. It's really no surprise that 15 ended up as messy as it did. I mean, they were trying to write an original story that actually worked as a narrative while simultaneously trying to tie in all these vague concepts and ideas from unfinished trailers and videos. I'm actually surprised that the game turned out as good as it did. I mean, that skit from the beginning of the video wasn't a joke. After Nomura watched the 2012 movie Les Mis, a musical that isn't even considered that great among musical fans like yours truly, he was inspired and went to the hypes at Square Enix asking if Versus 13 could be a musical. This is your quote-unquote savior of Final Fantasy, the man with the ultimate vision that would have bested any other game story, the guy whose project was supposedly ruined by other people. If he could have had his way, Final Fantasy Versus 13 would have been Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Shout out to my buddy Elias-san who made a cameo in this video. I actually made a cameo over on his channel, so you guys should go check that out. Huge thanks to Planner Walk for supporting me on Patreon. Really helps me out. Please consider pledging. Link is in the description. And I guess either way, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, be sure to blitz that like button, subscribe, and as always, stay tuned, Kupo.